Jr. The South Georgia father won more than $434,000 playing the Fantasy 5 lottery.
When I buy a lottery ticket, it feels like the best thing in the world.
The slim chance of a win on scratch-off tickets and lotto drawings had her going back for more, spending hours every day.
Now that I won that money, I'm gonna go into business.
But at the end, it feels like the end of the world at the same time. Because it's not enough. It was never enough.
For most of us, the lottery is the ultimate fantasy. In one instant, everything changes. Mansions, luxury cars, freedom from debt, the promise of never having to worry again. It's a dream we all share, a world where the struggles of everyday life simply disappear with the draw of 6 numbers. But what if the dream, the one we all chase, isn't what it seems? What if the moment your numbers come up, you've already lost? What if instead of fixing everything, winning the lottery destroys everything? For some, that's exactly what happened. They didn't just win millions, they lost everything that mattered. Their families, their friends, some even lost their lives. Because while the world celebrates those lucky enough to win, no one talks about what happens next. The pressure, the isolation, and the false friends who see you as nothing more than their own ticket to fortune. But what happens when the money runs out? What happens when the friends disappear? This is the real cost of winning the lottery. The truth behind the glitz, the glamour, and the headlines. The fortune that promises to change your life forever can be the very thing that takes it all away. Because sometimes winning isn't the beginning. Sometimes it's the end. Billy Bob Harold Jr., the $31 million fortune that took everything. Billy Bob Harold Jr. wasn't supposed to be rich. He wasn't born into wealth, didn't have a high-paying job, and he certainly wasn't a man with a lucky past. For most of his 47 years, Billy had bounced from one low-paying job to another, working as a stocker at Home Depot, trying to support his wife and 3 teenage kids. Life had been anything but easy. But for Billy, there was always hope. He was a man of deep faith, spending hours at his local church, praying for a break, some kind of sign that all his struggles would eventually be worth it. But faith alone wasn't enough to keep the lights on, and for Billy, financial security felt like a distant dream. So, like many people in his situation, he turned to the lottery. Not out of greed, but out of desperation. And then, in June 1997, something happened that would change Billy's life forever. He didn't realize it at first. The ticket sat crumpled in his pocket as he went about his day, stocking shelves, not thinking much about it. It wasn't until later, sitting in his old recliner, that he decided to check the numbers. As his eyes scanned the winning numbers, he paused. The numbers matched. Every single one. Billy Bob Harold Jr. had just won $31 million. In an instant, his world flipped upside down. Billy, a man who had scraped by his whole life, was suddenly a millionaire. For a brief moment, it felt like his prayers had been answered, like everything was finally falling into place. He believed that God had a hand in his good fortune, and he wasn't the only one who believed it. When he collected his first check, a staggering $1.24 million, it wasn't just his family who celebrated. His friends, church members, and even strangers seemed to show up out of nowhere, all congratulating him. At first, Billy didn't mind the attention. He was a generous man, eager to help those around him, and he felt like this was his chance to finally make a difference. But then, the requests started coming. At first, it was small things, a loan here, a gift there, but soon, people were coming to him with their hands out. Neighbors, distant relatives, even people he had never met. And Billy, being the kind-hearted man he was, couldn't say no. He bought homes for his family, donated tens of thousands to his church, and gave cash to anyone who asked. He believed he was doing the right thing. But the more Billy gave, the more people wanted. The phone calls became relentless. Day and night, his phone would ring with someone on the other end asking for more money. Billy tried changing his number several times, but no matter what he did, the calls kept coming. His generosity, once a source of pride, became a burden he couldn't escape, and the weight of it all began to crush him. Then, The cracks in his personal life started to show. The money that was supposed to bring his family closer together was driving them apart. Billy's wife, once his biggest supporter, began to resent the constant pressure and the endless demands for money. The tension in their home grew, and soon it became too much to bear. His marriage, once strong, crumbled under the strain, and his wife filed for divorce. Alone and isolated, Billy made one last attempt to regain control of his finances. He struck a deal with a company that offered to buy out his future lottery payments in exchange for a lump sum. But the deal wasn't what he expected. Instead of securing his future, Billy found himself with far less money than he had won, and his financial troubles were only getting worse. Then came May 22nd, 1999, just 20 months after Billy's life had supposedly changed for the better. That night, something broke inside him. The isolation, the pressure, the loss of his family, it all came crashing down. Billy locked himself in his bedroom, shut out the world, and made a decision he couldn't take back. He took a shotgun, pointed it to his chest, and pulled the trigger. His son, worried when Billy hadn't answered his calls, found him dead the next morning. Before his death, Billy had confided in a financial advisor, telling them, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." It was a heartbreaking revelation, one that no one expected from a man who had been given everything he ever dreamed of. In one of the notes Billy left behind, he wrote to his ex-wife, "I didn't want this. I just wanted you." The lottery didn't save Billy Bob Harold Jr. It destroyed him. What was supposed to be a blessing turned into a curse. And in the end, the fortune that promised so much only brought isolation, heartbreak, and tragedy.
The autopsy results are in for Chicago lottery teacher who was poisoned after he won.
Rouge Khan, the $1 million lottery win with a deadly price. Rouge Khan arrived in Chicago in the late 1980s, a man determined to build something out of nothing. He came from India with ambition, hard work, and the hope of living the American dream. Over time, that dream became a reality. By 2012, he owned multiple dry cleaning businesses, managed real estate, and was known in his community as a hard-working, respected man. His home in northern Chicago was a reflection of his success. But behind the success was a secret. Rouge had a quiet addiction, one he hid from most people around him. It wasn't drugs or alcohol. It was scratch-off lottery tickets. Most days, he'd stop by a local convenience store, spending small fortunes on tickets, chasing a win that never seemed to come. It was harmless enough, or so it seemed. A few dollars here, 100 there. No one really knew how much he was spending, how much he needed to win. Then, in June 2012, everything changed. One afternoon, Rouge purchased 2 tickets, just like he always did. The first was nothing, a blank loss. But the second held a prize that would change his life. Rouge Khan had won $1 million. His reaction wasn't one of wild celebration, but quiet satisfaction. He had plans for the money, plans to expand his business, take care of his family, and do good in his community. For Rouge, the jackpot was the culmination of years of hard work and perseverance. But he never got to see a penny of it. A month later, in July, Rouge sat down for dinner at home. It was a typical evening, nothing out of the ordinary. His wife, Shabana Ansari, prepared the meal as she always did. After finishing, Rouge suddenly collapsed, writhing in pain. Within the hour, he was dead. Doctors called it a natural death, a heart attack they assumed. To most, it seemed like an unexpected tragedy, the kind that strikes without warning. But something didn't sit right with Rouge's nephew. He insisted on further tests, and what they found changed everything. Rouge had been poisoned. Cyanide, an insidious, lethal dose, had been found in his blood. This wasn't a natural death. This was murder. The question that haunted everyone was simple.
Cyanide suicide, probably about, close to 20 years ago, that I wrote up as a case report.
Who would want to kill a man like Rouge Khan just weeks after he won the lottery? Suspicion immediately fell on his wife, Shabana. She claimed innocence, denied any involvement, but the timing of his death was too convenient for some. Days after his passing, Shabana had taken steps to cash the first portion of the lottery winnings, $425,000. Rouge's family, already suspicious, quickly moved to freeze the rest of his assets, fearing that Shabana had other motives. They questioned the legitimacy of her marriage to Rouge, even bringing up legal challenges to claim that they were never truly married. Shabana, in turn, fought back, producing a marriage certificate from India and insisting that her relationship with Rouge had been real, valid, and loving. The police, meanwhile, couldn't ignore the growing tension within the family. As investigators dug deeper, they looked not just at Shabana, but at her father. At the time of Rouge's death, her father owed over $120,000 in unpaid taxes. That debt raised more questions. But like Shabana, he denied any involvement in the poisoning. The legal battle over Rouge's estate continued. His siblings fought to ensure that his daughter from his first marriage received her share of the inheritance. Court cases stretched on with accusations flying back and forth. Was this a calculated move to secure Rouge's wealth, or was it simply a tragic coincidence? The investigation lingered for years with no arrests and no definitive answers. Despite the cyanide evidence, no one was ever charged in Rouge's death. The case remained open, but the trail had grown cold. 9 years later, Rouge Khan's death is still an open wound for his family. His wife continues to run the family's dry cleaning business, maintaining her innocence all along. Rouge's siblings, however, have never stopped believing that someone close to him was responsible for his death. The lottery money that was supposed to change Rouge's life only brought suspicion, conflict, and heartbreak. In the end, Rouge Khan's story is not just one of wealth, it's a cautionary tale of how quickly fortunes can change. A man who worked his entire life for success won the ultimate prize, only to lose everything. A family torn apart by suspicion, a fortune that instead of bringing joy, brought ruin, and a murder that remains unsolved.
Birch Jr. The South Georgia father won more than $434,000 playing the Fantasy 5 lottery.
Gregory Birch Jr., the jackpot that led to murder. Gregory Birch Jr. was just 20 years old, living in the small town of Fitzgerald, Georgia. A forklift operator by trade, he led a simple life, working hard to provide for his family. On November 29, 2015, that life took a sudden turn when Gregory decided to buy a quick pick lottery ticket at the local H&R Food Mart. It wasn't something out of the ordinary for him, but this time, fate was different. Gregory had won the Georgia lottery, $434,000. For a young man from a small town, it was more money than he had ever imagined. But when the reality hit him, he was shocked. He couldn't believe it, but the excitement of what the future might hold was overwhelming. The next day, he picked up his check and his life officially changed. Gregory's first thought was to help others. In the spirit of the holidays, he bought Christmas presents for people in need. He didn't see the money as a way to indulge in luxury, but as a way to make a difference. Friends and family described him as a young man with good intentions, trying to do the right thing. But good intentions weren't enough to shield him from what came next. On January 21st, 2016, just 2 months after his life-changing win, Gregory was at home with his 3 children and his girlfriend, Jasmine Hendricks. It was an ordinary evening until everything changed. Without warning, 3 masked men kicked in the front door of his home. Gregory's world turned upside down in an instant. The intruders demanded money, shouting at him as he sat on the sofa holding his 2-year-old child. One man went to search the house, while the other 2 aimed their guns at Gregory. Panicked, but protective, Gregory begged them not to shoot. In desperation, Gregory threw his pants towards them, offering his bank card in exchange for their mercy. They took the card, but it wasn't enough. Without hesitation, one of the masked men shot Gregory in both of his legs, leaving him bleeding on the floor. They rummaged through Jasmine's belongings, stealing her wallet and 2 of Gregory's cell phones before trying to make their escape. Then, one of the masked men made a decision that no one expected. He came back inside. Gregory, helpless and bleeding, was shot in the chest. The 20-year-old father didn't survive. Jasmine, overwhelmed by terror, ran to a neighbor for help, frantically banging on their car window. When they opened the door, she scrambled inside, clutching her children. The neighbor, alarmed by her distress, drove to safety and called 911. The police responded to the scene quickly, but it wasn't until 2 months later that they pieced together what really happened. Through a series of tips, 6 suspects were eventually identified and arrested. A 7th, Nathaniel Baker, was already in jail for an unrelated crime. They were charged with multiple counts, including murder, aggravated assault, armed robbery, and gang activity. The authorities confirmed what everyone feared. This was no random home invasion. Gregory had been targeted, and his lottery win had put a deadly target on his back. But the violence didn't stop with Gregory's murder. In June 2016, one of the suspects, Ernest Holcomb, managed to escape from jail. Holcomb slipped out of sight while in the jail's exercise yard, climbing onto the roof and shedding his pink jumpsuit before disappearing into the night. His escape triggered a manhunt, and local authorities worked around the clock to bring him back into custody. Holcomb's freedom didn't last long. He was found hiding under a house the next day and returned to jail. It took over a year before the suspects faced trial.
Convicted of killing a man for his lottery winnings will stay in prison.
In February 2017, Nathaniel Baker was convicted of Gregory's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, he turned to Gregory's parents, offering an apology. But Gregory's father wasn't interested in hearing it. "I wish they could kill you today," he told Nathaniel. "You killed my son, and you have no remorse." In the months that followed, the other suspects faced their own trials. Waylon Jordan, one of the gunmen, was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. His defense team tried to appeal, but the Georgia Supreme Court rejected their attempts. Witnesses testified that the group had joked about Gregory's murder, even laughing about how they had divided up the money and stolen his wallet. In June 2017, DeBrantis Overstreet, another key suspect, was found guilty on 14 charges. He had orchestrated the plan, contacting the others to set up the robbery. The night of the attack, the group drove to Gregory's home in 2 cars, ready to strike. It was DeBrantis who ultimately fired the shot that ended Gregory's life. His girlfriend, Rosalind, testified against him, admitting that she had been part of the plan because she feared what DeBrantis might do to her if she refused. She had driven the getaway car, but it was a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. For Gregory Birch Jr., a young man who wanted nothing more than to do good with his lottery winnings, the dream quickly turned into a nightmare. His fortune made him a target, and in the end, it cost him everything.